Welcome to the Stormwater Assessment Meeting. Kyle Stevens from Stantec Consulting Services will begin the presentation at 6:05. The presentation will be followed immediately by a question and answer session. Please feel free to submit any questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and opening the Q&A window. During the Q&A session, I will direct each question to the appropriate party for a verbal response. Additionally, you can find general information and a list of frequently asked questions at www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater. Welcome to the Stormwater Assessment Meeting. Kyle Stevens from Stantec Consulting Services will begin the presentation at 6:05. Thank you for joining us for this evening's Stormwater Assessment Meeting. Kyle Stevens from Stantec Consulting Services is about to begin the presentation. The presentation will be followed immediately by a question and answer session. Please feel free to submit any questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and opening the Q&A window. During the Q&A session, I will direct each question to the appropriate party for a verbal response. Kyle, feel free to begin when you're ready.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. So what I'd like to do tonight is walk us through the stormwater rate study and the results really of that rate study that we've conducted for the City of Fort Lauderdale. Now, there are a number of components of the study, and they're best thought of as interconnected investigations. And we'll be talking about each one tonight. And so the first one on our list will be the revenue requirements. And simply put, that is an understanding of the cash dollars that it requires to run a stormwater operation like the city runs sustainably over a 10-year period. Next, we'll be talking about cost allocation. How do we measure the benefits that parcels within the city receive from stormwater operations? Finally, the fee structure analysis will identify a number of structures and the recommended structure as a component of this study. And then we'll talk about the method of billing. Currently, stormwater fees in the city are collected on the monthly utility bill with water, sewer, and solid waste. We'll talk about the options on a go-forwad basis for a non-ad valorem assessment. So let's jump right into it. With regards to the revenue requirements, the current fee supports several elements of stormwater operations. First and foremost is the maintenance and operational elements. It's about $11.5 million. I like to think about this as the items that are conducted on an annual basis that make the system efficient. This is the cleaning of pipes, the lining of pipes, the removal of debris from catch basins. That's funded by the current rate. Additionally, there's $4 million in renewal and replacement capital projects. And what I mean by that is that's investments in infrastructure, physical infrastructure in the community. And then finally, within the confines of this rate study, an additional element was brought into the analysis, and that was the master planning efforts that the city has conducted in the past, which I prioritized and identified a number of other capital projects outside of what's currently funded. And in the first phase of that, there was the identification of 7 neighborhoods with the most needs from a stormwater perspective within the community. I've listed those down here below as you go down the screen. And that is currently unfunded. It's roughly $200 million in total. And so the goal of this particular part of the analysis is to put all the cost requirements in, project them over a 10-year period, and then try to understand the sustainability dynamics of delivering stormwater services in the city. And so what we'll jump to next is a dashboard screenshot of the model that we put together that simulates the stormwater operations for the city of Fort Lauderdale over the next 10 years. And in this first view, this is a diagnostic scenario. And so what I've done here is I've held revenues flat at the current 2020 levels. You'll see no rate increases in the future. But we've loaded in the cost requirements, and most notably, I talked about those capital projects. Those are shown down here at the bottom, $200 million split between 2020 and 21. An additional $200 million is also forecasted in 2026. Now, this works very much like your own personal bank account. This yellow line is the cash coming out of the fund on an annual basis. The black line is the cash coming in. And in this particular scenario, we see a growing gap between the two where cash out exceeds cash coming in. As you would imagine in that particular scenario, if we play that forward, this particular graphic shows our ending year fund balance. That would show that it very quickly by 2022, when we have to pay the debt service associated with those capital projects, because we would bond fund those, the system would be unsustainable. We would have negative fund balance, and that can't really happen, but it shows us a trajectory of that if that were to continue forward. And so the next question would be, what would that take in order to create a sustainable paradigm? In this particular screenshot, what we've done now is put in revenue increases that would be just enough in order to pay the ongoing expenses of the stormwater utility on a go-forward basis. What that would mean is in FY 2021, next fiscal year, we would need revenues increasing over last year, the year we're in, by 54%. What that would do is, now if we look at this orange line and the black line, the cash in and cash out, we see the hallmark of sustainability, where these two lines are on top of one another for much of the forecast period. So we're trying to align those two so the cash coming in is very much equal to cash going out. Then in the long term, this shows a current projection of revenue increases. And there's some inflationary increases here because each year the cost of doing business tends to go up a little bit. But then if we were to do another debt issuance out here in the future, we would see larger rate increases associated with those generational stormwater investments. And one quick point on the accounting for stormwater, this is a separate enterprise fund. And what that really means concretely is that the revenues for stormwater services that parcel owners pay can only be used for stormwater services. They can't be used for any other services within the community. Now, next we'll talk about the cost allocation. Off to the left of your screen, I've put a list of common metrics that communities will use in order to determine the benefit of stormwater services derived by parcels within a service area. I have ordered these kind of least equitable to most. In the most basic setup, sometime we'll see that stormwater infrastructure and ongoing O&M is paid for out of taxable value. Now, I would argue there's not a high relationship between the amount of stormwater a parcel can generate and its value, but we do see that happen in very young utilities often. What more mature utilities will do going down the list is use parcel developmental characteristics to drive the allocation of cost to those parcels to determine the benefit that they're seeing. So we see things like dwelling units, the gross area, the size of the parcel, pervious area, and impervious area. Now, when we looked at this for the City of Fort Lauderdale, and we had detailed discussions with city staff, what we understood is there's a little bit of an interesting dynamic here. These pictures off to the right are some pictures of flooding in Fort Lauderdale, and there's precipitation-driven events, which are very common all over when municipalities have to manage stormwater. But in the City of Fort Lauderdale, given its coastal proximity, its relatively low elevation, there's also very heavy tidal influence. And the king tide events that happen certain times of the years can really put a strain on the stormwater system and can indeed flood the streets. And so what that means is, from a practical standpoint, a lot of stormwater activities and investments are happening in the street. And so with regards to that, we brought another metric to the table, which is trip generation rates, which determine how a parcel benefits from free and passable roads, and also from the water quality activities that take place in the street. A quick primer on trip generation rates. This slide shows us essentially what we're effectively and how we're effectively using this in regards to this study. And so for trip generation rates, what they essentially do is help us understand how different parcel types and land uses utilize the roadway network. And so first, over here in my example, I've got a single family home. On average, they generate about 9.44 trips per day. If we compare that to a gas station or convenience store, about 845 60 per 1,000 square feet. And for a supermarket, it's about 106 per 1,000 square feet. And so at the broad land use level, not necessarily talking about an individual parcel, this gives us an ability to differentiate the benefit that different parcels receive. And some parcels utilize the roadway network a lot more than other ones. Now, we presented this to commission, and what the commission wanted to go forward with was a hybrid structure that would take two things into consideration. It would take in the current fee structure, which is in place today. It is based on effective impervious area. I'll talk about how it exactly works in a second, but also trip generation rates, recognizing some of those benefits that I just discussed that stormwater activities convey to parcels or confer to parcels. So the first thing we had to do was a cost allocation analysis, which would split the revenue requirement, or the total amount of money that we need on an annual basis, between the two components of the fee structure. And the way we did that was with a cost of service analysis that looked at two of the core service delivery items for stormwater, which is quality related activities, improving the quality of the water we're delivering to receiving bodies, and also quantity related activities, dealing with the physical gallons that we've got to move and transfer to a receiving body. So what this looks like is we got in a room with the people that know the system the best, and we went through line item by line item in the budget, cost center by cost center, and split the expenses between quality and quantity for the next fiscal year. You can see the color here relates to quantity in blue, and in the lighter blue is the quality related cost. When you look at the entirety of the enterprise fund, it's about 20% quality related activity, 80% quantity. We then made an attachment of the quality related activities to the trip generation part of the rate structure, and the quantity related 80% of the cost to the current structure, or the structure based on impervious area. Now, with regards to the fee structure, I'm going to take a second on this next slide. This walks through how each and every parcel within the City of Fort Lauderdale was viewed through this assessment, or through this stormwater fee structure, to come up with a unique bill. And so first and foremost, we take the entire revenue requirement. As I mentioned, we're splitting 80% of it to the current structure. It's $25.1 million. The current structure has three independent classes. So it has single family in one class, improved parcels in another class, meaning that the parcel has some kind of development on it. It's not in its natural state. It has been improved, typically has impervious area of some kind on it, or area that water can't easily penetrate. And then the third classification is vacant or unimproved parcels. So if it's a single family home, the current structure applies the rate based on the number of dwelling units that's on the parcel. That is readily available in the Broward County property appraisers data. The current rate I've updated off here to the right, which is $218.71 for this particular component of the rate. If it's an improved property, it's actually done on the gross acreage of the parcel. So it's the overall size of the parcel based on what's in the most up-to-date Broward County property appraisers data, and that's 227301 per acre. And then if it's a vacant parcel, it's again on the gross acreage, but at 567. So that's one component, that's the current. And then the second is the trip structure. And so the trip structure gets 80% of the revenue requirement. We've calculated a unit rate of $4.19 per trip based on the overall level of trips that are calculated in the service area, given all of the characteristics in the property appraisers data and the land use rates from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And so what that does is on a parcel by parcel basis, looks at the trip generation, the average trip generation. There are 63 individual classifications for trip generation rates that were used for the entire service area, matched up with land uses. And that creates a bill for trips that is then matched with the impervious area-based bill, which gives the total stormwater fee for fiscal year 21. And so what I'd like to do now is just run through a couple of the customer impacts to show how this would affect customers, different types of customers within the service area. And so this first example is a single family home. I've broken it up between annual and monthly, and I'll talk about that in a second because of the billing collection change for fiscal year 21. But effectively, a single family home pays $14 monthly or $168 annually. The calculated rates presented herein would be $258.26 or $21.52 on a monthly basis. That's a change of $90.26 on an annual basis, or $7.52. And now remember, that includes the needed revenue increases that were identified in the first part of the analysis, which is about 54% more revenue in fiscal year 2021, which would be the next fiscal year. So to support those large capital investments. How does that compare to other communities? As part of the analysis, we put together a peer survey of what other single-family homes are charged in different service areas. The City of Fort Lauderdale is currently at $14, and then the calculated rate I just showed is $21.52, which would move it over 2 rungs in the survey. And whenever I show the survey, I think there are two important points. So we've done no detailed analysis to understand each of the funding dynamics that's taking place in these communities. But also, if you happen to look on the right side of the screen, what you'll often see is our communities that are coastal, such as Fort Lauderdale. The cost of operating a stormwater system is much higher. And we'll see many of these communities have rates that are similar, or over time, we often see these rates are moving in the upward direction to meet many of the same pressures that the City of Fort Lauderdale is seeing in its stormwater rate this year. Now, with regards to condos, condos are unique in the sense that currently stormwater services are on the utility bill with water, sewer, and solid waste often. That means that most condos receive one bill if it's master metered. And that bill is then divided up to the units through an association or an HOA. What this would show is that currently it's about $3.55. This is an example 110 unit example, kind of a mid-rise, if you will. That's $42.55. The calculated rate is $75.76, or on a monthly basis, $6.31 per unit. That's a change of $33.21 or $2.76 per month. Now, with regards to an institutional example, this is a church that I've pulled out. Their current bill on an annual basis is $1428.71. The calculated rate is $2526.32. That's a change of $1,097.61 from the current rate. Now, with regards to a commercial example here, I've shown a supermarket in this particular example. It has a very large building, a very large parcel, in a high trip generation rate. And so in this particular one, what's key is I've had this little proportionality bar down here at the bottom. In this particular example, there's a lot of benefit being generated from the ability of patrons to get to this particular facility. And so we see the trip generation rate as a larger percentage of the bill in this particular case. What that shows is on an annual basis, this parcel is currently paying $32.0830. The calculated rate as part of this analysis is $584.61. That's a change of $19,376.31 annually. Now, I've also done a detailed example tonight, given this one is particularly aimed at commercial parcel owners. And so I'll take this example. I'm going to take a second to go through it just to talk about and show how a bill is created for a commercial parcel in detail. And so I'll take the first one up top. This is the current fee structure. And this is a parcel over here that's a general use commercial office type building. The parcel size is shown up here. I believe let me see, there's one thing blocking my screen to see that. I believe it's a little over 53,000 square feet. Divide that by 4356, which is essentially the amount of square feet within an acre, which converts us to about 1.24 acres. We then have a fee for a Cat 2, Category 2 or improved parcel of $2,273.01. That's the fees I mentioned a second ago, which means the first component of the bill comes out to $2,809.90. For the second component of the bill, down here in blue, I've calculated the trip generation rates. And so what we do is take the building square footage in this particular case, which is 40,504 because there is some vertical floors here, and divide that by 1,000. We then need to multiply that times 9.74, which is, for this particular parcel, the amount of trips generated per 1,000 square feet. What that gives us in total is 394 trips generated on this particular parcel on average. We then multiply that by 491 to give us the trip generation component of the assessment, which would be $1,653. If we add those two together, we get $4,462.90 for this particular property. So it kind of shows you the details for each and every parcel that we go through to calculate an assessment that has a bifurcation like this with the two different elements being applied. Now, the final element of the study I'll talk about is the method of collection. And so with regards to stormwater fees, there's often two ways that municipalities will collect it. The first being the utility billing method, which is what the City of Fort Lauderdale currently uses. So that's on the left side of the screen. That means that the bills come monthly, often with water, sewer, solid waste. The recommendation as part of this study is to move to a non-ad valorem assessment, which would mean the fee comes once a year on the property's tax bill in the non-ad valorem section. And the reasons for that recommendation is because there are a number of benefits of moving that. So first and foremost, it creates a direct relationship between the city and the parcel being billed. With the utility billing method, oftentimes there's a one-to-many relationship where we're billing a utility account. There might be multiple parcels behind it. And so it's much easier to get greater accuracy using the non-ad valorem assessment. We also get higher collection rates, lower administration. And so for those reasons, it's been recommended. The transition will take place starting in mid-October. So depending on the exact utility cycle an account is on and a parcel is on, the stormwater bill will transition off of the utility billing in mid-October, move to the non-ad valorem to be paid on that bill that typically comes out in the first part of November on the tax bill for the entirety of the next fiscal year of costs for the parcel. Now, with regards to peer municipalities, I've put together this survey of the top 10 stormwater utilities as far as size in the state and how they currently collect stormwater services or stormwater fees in their particular municipality. And what we see, it's about 50-50 currently. So if we look at the orange triangles, those are municipalities that are using the non-ad valorem assessment. The green circles are the municipalities using the utility billing method. What I will say is each and every year we're seeing a number of utilities transition to the non-ad valorem assessment. So it's definitely some movement in the industry to try to capture some of those benefits that I just talked about that led to the recommendation for the City of Fort Lauderdale. Also, as part of the study this year, we've stood up on the city's website GIS viewer. And what this allows is for any parcel owner to go and click on their parcel within this viewer, see the exact, this little pop-up will come up when you click in it or you type in an address. It will tell you the exact parameters used to come up with the assessment for that parcel. So what category is it, how many square feet, how many trips, and the annual assessment. And so it's a good way to look at the exact determinants that were pulled from the Broward County property appraiser's role to determine this assessment. I put a long link down at the bottom here to get to it. The next slide here, as we transition to questions and discussions, I put a much shorter link here that will get you to the landing page for Stormwater, which has the GIS viewer on it. And with Jason, with that, I will conclude the formal remarks here, and Jason, turn it back over to you for any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Kyle. For anyone who may have joined late, you can submit your questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And with that, we'll jump into a couple of questions here. The first question is, did you get input from residents on the proposed new stormwater structure? Kyle, can you go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And so some of the background with this study, Stantec and the team was initially engaged in 2016. So we've actually been working on this since 2016 to date. And through that time period, we've made a number of presentations, not only to the commission, but to the Fort Lauderdale civic associations and infrastructure task force. And so tried to garner that public input and take those recommendations as we've evolved to a recommendation, which has been shown in this presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is, why did my stormwater fee move from the utility bill to the property tax bill?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I'm just going to bounce back over this slide. So as part of the study, we reviewed the two most common methods for collecting stormwater fees, and we did make a recommendation to move it from the utility billing basis, which is currently done, over to the non-ad valorem assessment. And as I mentioned as I went through, that really is to try to capture some of the big benefits there of being more accurate, higher collection rates, and much easier to administer from the city's perspective and also from a cost standpoint.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, the next question is, will my utility bill be reduced by the same amount of my assessment?
It will not. And so what will happen is the utility bill will phase out in mid-October, depending on your exact utility. They'll begin to phase out. You will have then an assessment for the next fiscal year that will be calculated based on the new methodology that I just talked through. Each one will be unique depending on your exact parcel, what type of land use. But overall, the generalization being most of these fees are going up because of the underlying need for more revenue in order to make those generational capital investments that I talked about in the revenue requirements.
Perfect. And then the next one is going to be for Dr. Gassman, if she's still there. What are some examples of things the city has done to improve its stormwater infrastructure and address flooding concerns?
Thanks, Jason. The city's been very active in improving its infrastructure over the course of the last really 8 years since the stormwater utility was created. We have added, for example, 160 plus tidal valves to reduce tidal flooding in those neighborhoods impacted. We have changed policies and included new policies in our comprehensive plan that specifically address the need to add infrastructure and improvements in neighborhoods that are vulnerable to flooding. And of course, we've developed the Stormwater Master Plan in 2018, which is part of the $200 million that Kyle had mentioned that we're trying to fund so that we can put in those improvements in those 7 neighborhoods and have adequate funding moving forward to continue to not only maintain all of those improvements, but to continue the improvements that we do through the operational budget and not through the capital improvement budget.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Gassman. This next one for Kyle. With the pandemic, the land use traffic generation rates have changed, and in some cases, likely permanently. Are you concerned that the trip rates are now out of date and may be challenged?
I'm not, no. And so when we look at studies like this one, and we're considering the billing metrics to use, one of the key things is data availability. And so I recognize that, things are always changing on the ground, but the ITE trip generation rates represent the greatest data point available to bring to bear on a problem like this, where we need to use a metric to identify the benefit from use of the roadway. And that is the most common data source that municipalities will use to determine that benefit for other services like transportation-based impact fees or street impact fees. And so I'm not worried about that. I could see in the future, as this rate evolves, though, and IT comes out with new information, it could potentially be updated.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question is, I represent a one-of-a-kind property in Fort Lauderdale, and the methodology used does not reflect the stormwater usage or an accurate calculation. Is there an appeal process, or does this have to go directly to the commission?
So there's no direct appeal process for the fee. I would say if there's any characteristics that would be incorrect from your property, those would be with the Broward County property appraiser would be the best place to take those up. So I'm not sure of the exact dynamics of your parcel, but those are kind of the two options that I would throw out there.
Absolutely. And then I'll also add to that, if you'd like to send an email to stormwaterrate@fortlauderdale.gov, we can go ahead and look into and speak to your specific situation. The next question is, my fee will be going from $11,000 to $31,000. That's a huge increase. Why such a large increase? And then there's a follow-up question is, when will these fees go down to a more reasonable level?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know the exact characteristics of your parcel. My guess would be that there is a high trip generation rate potentially applicable there. Oftentimes, those are the ones as part of this assessment that have seen the larger increases. And that, again, is to recognize those benefits that are conferred to parcels from the city, doing activities such as keeping the streets clear and passable during those storm events or tidal events, but also doing water quality activities in the street. With regard to the second part of the question, I showed a trajectory of the revenue requirements going forward. I'm just backing up to the slide right now, and I'd like to make a quick point on that. And so with regards to FY21, which are the utility assessments that have been mailed out and would be effective November, typically that tax bill, that's a 54% increase in the total revenue for the utility. The trajectory going forward would see smaller increases in the future, followed by a larger increase in FY 2026, depending on the exact timing of those capital investments. It is at the commission's discretion, though, annually to set this assessment level.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is, all non-ad valorem issues are directed from the property appraiser's office to the city. So is there anyone at the city other than the email suggested to speak with that has the ability to address? And the ultimate answer to that question, I believe, is that September 14th, there's going to be a final hearing on this item where the commission will either approve or disapprove this item. In regards to a specific appeal process or anybody in the city being able to adjust the rate for a specific property, I don't believe there's anybody with that ability. But the email address that was provided, that is the best way to get that escalated. Okay, it looks like all questions have been addressed at this time. We'll give it another minute to see if anything else comes through. So we did receive another question here. I joined late. Can you define a trip again?
Yeah, absolutely. So as it concerns to this stormwater assessment, really what we're reflecting in here is the average weekday trip generation rates. Those are from ITE, which is the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And a trip really fundamentally is any trip you can imagine of leaving or coming to a parcel. And so that is on a single family home. Kind of the best examples are when you leave your property in your car, or maybe when there's deliveries or trips being generated to that parcel. And so it really is a measurement, a unit of measurement, and a reflection of how a particular parcel generates trips on the local street network.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyle. I believe we may be waiting on one last question to come in here. All right, so the next question is submerged land assessed the same as unplanned? Or, I'm sorry, the same as upland?
That's a good question. I would think that submerged land in most cases has been kind of excluded. We'd have to look at the exact parcel you're talking about. Usually the land use on that is pretty particular in the property appraisers, and so I don't believe that type of land has been assessed as part of this.
Okay, perfectly, thank you. The next question is, why is the trip a cost variable?
Yeah, absolutely. So the trip is a cost variable, and it was brought to the table in this study because of the unique characteristics of providing stormwater services in Fort Lauderdale. And so, as I mentioned, when we got into the analysis and we started talking to the people that run the system on a daily basis and how stormwater services are provided, we realized that it's pretty unique. It's a little bit different than many other communities, not only in Florida, but in the nation, and the fact that upwards of 90% of the activity is taking place first and foremost in that street area. And so you can think of the quality activities when we've got debris entering the system, that's in the catch basins, whether it's the tidal influences that come backward up the system onto the street when the capital investments haven't been made to thwart that. And so for those reasons, trips were brought into the equation in order to provide a metric to determine the benefits that individual parcels and classes of parcels receive within the community from those roadway networks of being free and passable during storm events or during tidal events. And so it's just trying to match the assessment and the stormwater fee with the way that benefits are received within the community.
Excellent, thank you. So the next question is, are there no live questions? And the answer to that is the questions that are being answered live are the ones that are being typed in and then verbally read, but it is not possible for our participants to speak during the meeting. All right, so we'll give it another minute, see if any additional questions come through here. All right, so the next question is, my concern is that my street floods easily. There are times that we can't drive down the street. Are the non-trips because of an impossible street counted?
Not sure I know the answer to that. Was it non-trips, Jason? Was that the verbiage?
That was the verbiage, the non-trips. I think what they're referring to is are we accounting for the inability to travel down a road due to stormwater?
Okay. Yeah, no, that consideration has not been made as part of this assessment. So again, what we're looking at and what we're considering here is the average benefit that land uses make of the street. So we're not trying to go to the individual level of an individual parcel or an individual home to determine their exact trip generation. So it's using it in a much broader 30,000 foot view, if you will.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, it looks like that all questions have been addressed. We'd like to thank you for participating in this evening's meeting. Should you think of any additional questions, please feel free to submit them at waterserve.fortlauderdale.gov using the call center stormwater assessment issue type. And in case you joined us late, you can find additional information on www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater for additional details. Thank you.